This week on Quadriga, Nigeria votes in the shadow of Boko Haram. Saturday's presidential election is set to be the closest such contest since military rule ended in 1999. President Goodluck Jonathan, a Christian from the south, has held the office since 2010. His main challenger is former military ruler Muhammadu Buhari, a Muslim especially popular in the north. The election is being held against the background of an Islamist insurgency in the northeast of the country. Multinational forces have recaptured some territory from Boko Haram militias, but that has not stopped attacks and kidnappings. President Jonathan postponed the vote by 6 weeks because of the violence, and he's ordered the country's borders closed. So can elections now be held successfully? And how fragile is Nigeria's democracy? Your host this week, Peter Craven.
Yes, hello and a very warm welcome to this latest edition of Quadriga, coming to you from the German capital, Berlin. And today we're focusing on the rescheduled parliamentary and presidential election in Nigeria taking place this weekend. It comes at a very tense time, of course, for Nigeria, not least in view of the insurgency, the Boko Haram insurgency that we've just been hearing about. So, to discuss what we can expect in the coming days and indeed in the coming weeks, I'm joined here in the studio by a panel of three keen observers of all things Nigerian, of African development in general. Let me introduce them to you without any further ado, beginning with Nigerian-born John Emeka Akude. Until recently, he was a senior researcher at the German Development Institute, focusing on development policy. He's also a specialist on conflict and conflict management in Africa, and he's now an independent political consultant. Also joining us is Professor Robert Kappel, a senior research fellow at and former head of the German Institute of Global and Area Studies in Hamburg. He has a wealth of experience in African affairs. And we're also joined by Bettina Gaus, a political correspondent with the Taz newspaper here in Berlin. A long-time Africa specialist, she's written on a variety of African issues, including most recently on Africa's emerging middle class. John Akude, I would like to begin with you, if I might, with a quote from US President Barack Obama. He has described the upcoming election in Nigeria as an historic opportunity for the country. It's a very upbeat assessment, and I would like to ask you if you share his confidence in what is possible, especially against the backdrop of the Boko Haram insurgency.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks to Deutsche Welle for having me here. Yeah, I think in one sense, I should share Obama's confidence because especially since the last 3 to 4 weeks after the intervention of the American foreign minister, you remember he visited Nigeria and tried to talk to the two major contenders and telling them about the necessity of toning down their language, you know, with reference to violence, and you know, the relevance of also trying to get their supporters to, in a frame of mind, to accept the results of the elections, whichever way it goes. I share this, and I've been talking to Nigerians, monitoring the situation since then, and I will say that until now, the intervention of Obama and John Kerry have been having some impact. At least the political parties have toned down their languages. The two parties have been, you know, they've met. So I think on that, you know, there is reason to be optimistic, you know. But on the other side, you also know that a lot of things are not going right in Nigeria, and there are suspicions of the incumbent president trying to use the power of incumbency to, you know, influence the direction of the votes, you know. And of course, you know, the issue of Boko Haram in the north is not over yet, you know, and these things might really mar the election. So there's still cause to worry. But again, the election is very, very important. It's because, you know, it's very important in the sense that It will be about, the second time or third time that there is this, smooth transfer of power, after election. So, and this is what you need for political stability, and that makes it very, very important. Especially at the last elections, we are not as charged as this one. This is a very charged electoral period, especially within the context of conflicts in the north, and the fact that the North really wants to get back to power, and the president from the South doesn't really want to relinquish power. So it's a tense situation. But we have always had this tense situation in Nigeria. We've always thought that Nigeria might break apart or there will be an all-out war. But at the end of the day, one way or the other, they've managed to sort things out. It's not worked very well, but at least there's never been, a total breakdown.
Okay, so you've given us a panoramic introduction to many, many of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. Professor Kappel, let's just talk about Boko Haram. You've talked about Boko Haram and its influence, the shadow it casts over Nigerian politics. Tell us a little bit more, because you've been writing about this very recently. You've been thinking about it. What can you tell us?
Boko Haram lost ground during the last weeks, but it still is there and will remain there. And it's a strong organization, a guerrilla organization. It is embedded in the milieu of the northeastern part of Nigeria. It has 8,000 to 10,000 fighters, partly decentralized organization, and it can organize a guerrilla fight on the one side and also has the potential to fight against the Nigerian army. It lost a little bit control over some parts of the northern areas because the armies of Chad and Cameroon, supported by France and Niger, and on the other side also the Nigerian army, cooperated and tried to battle down Boko Haram. But it will remain. It will remain because it's a very flexible organization. And what happened during the last weeks was that some of the fighters, let's say 500, 800 fighters, were killed or taken by the forces, combined forces, but there are 8,000 fighters on the side of Boko Haram, so they will remain. And partly they fled also the country and belong to these refugees of 1.5 million people, and also fled into other parts of Nigeria. So,
do you think Boko Haram can actively destabilize this weekend's elections? That is what they have threatened to do.
I'm sure they can. The kidnapping of these 350 people, the government today said it's right. They have taken these people.
The most recent abductions,
yes,
which we need to talk about.
Yesterday or the day before. And they have shown that they can act, that they can put the forces behind, and that's very interesting. For the kidnapping of so many people, you need very good logistics, you need information about the situation, where is the army now, and you need a very good organization. So it shows that Boko Haram is there, and we will see what will happen during the next days, because at the poll station, it's not possible to control all the poll station, and Boko Haram is very good equipped and very flexible, and so I'm not sure that there will be peaceful elections in the northeastern part of the country.
Bettina Gaus, just 1 second, because I'd like to bring Bettina in specifically, because I mean, when we're talking about these abductions, we're talking about women and girls in the main. Yeah, what do you make of that?
Of the abductions, they're abhorrent, obviously. What do you
they're abhorrent, but what does it tell us about where Nigeria is at this point in time, and what threat Boko Haram poses to this election process?
Well, I tend to agree with Professor Kappel. They lost ground recently. But also because I think they've overreached themselves. I mean, the fact that they said they will start invading Niger as well, and Niger is in a very fragile position, being threatened from Libya in the north and being threatened by Boko Haram in the south. And the fact that they want to destabilize Cameroon and all this led to this combined effort by various countries. And I think militarily, yes, they have lost ground. But as you said, when it comes to the abductions, it shows clearly that they still are in a position to attack villages, to attack schools, to create fear, real fear. And I think when we look at the elections, it takes a lot of courage in the northeast of the country to go to the poll stations and to cast their vote, because Boko Haram has declared openly and frankly they think the elections are anti-Islamic, so they want to fight them. And as we all know, it doesn't take a lot to assassinate a couple of people or to have a bomb explode in front of a polling station. And also, you mentioned it before, elections have always been tense. There has always been a question about rigging, about fraud. Now, so highly contested, now such a lot of people in the north being maybe afraid to cast their votes, now the borders being closed, and the refugees who fled the Boko Haram atrocities are not in a position to vote. So I'm afraid if Goodluck Jonathan is going to win these elections, that there will be a lot of dissatisfaction in the north. It will be growing, and people will say these elections were not free and fair, and maybe they will even be right. So I'm very sorry to say, but I'm not overall very optimistic.
John, you had a point that you wanted to make.
Yeah, the point I just wanted to chip in was that, you know, the prowess or the success of Boko Haram is tied to the weakness of the Nigerian military and the lack of preparedness of the military and the government to tackle that problem. You see, because the way we discuss it is like we create the impression that we're dealing with a very big and very strong monster. I don't share this view. I think the strength of Boko Haram lies with the poor governance of Nigeria, especially the relationship between the state and the society, especially the relationship between the security forces and the society. You know, that is what Boko Haram is feeding on. So if you want to fight Boko Haram, you have to clean up our security system. The army has to really become what it's supposed to be, an army that protects the people, not an army whose generals are mainly concerned with making money, earning millions of dollars, buying private jets in a country where people cannot have $1 to eat a meal a day. You know, and secondly, the Nigerian army is not really fully cooperating with this international task force, because, understandably too, in one sense, you know, because the international task force is beginning to, record some successes. There are situations where they even, you know, drove Boko Haram away from 1 or 2 towns, and we are calling on the Nigerian military to come and take over these towns. And that is an insult to the Nigerian military. And Nigerian military is a military that has really earned some reputation in really fighting real wars, even outside Nigeria. So when...
But that's a long time ago.
That's a long time ago, that's true. But this reputation is still there, even though a lot of things have happened in the last 10, 15 years to destroy that.
May I add
you
to
can
this?
Come in.
Because I think I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think it's very difficult to assess how much support Boko Haram has in the local population. But there is, without a certain degree of support, it would be impossible for them to operate.
I mean, the whole battle against Boko Haram can't be up to the military and can't be up to President Jonathan. What about the Muslim authorities in northern Nigeria, the people in Kano, for example?
But that's what I was about to say, saying that the marginalization of the north has been continuing. Yes, predominantly ever since independence, the political power was with the north. But the economic power has been with the South. And now, with Goodluck Jonathan, even a politician from the South is president. So the feeling of being neglected, which can be, well, this is valid, The infrastructure is really bad as compared to the south. In some states in the north, the absolute poverty line is above 85%. So of course people feel dissatisfied and feel being left alone. This doesn't mean that they agree. No, obviously, I don't think you could ever say that a substantial amount of people would agree with random bomb blasts and all this. But without a certain amount of support among the local population and maybe even among the military,
yeah, I would like to add this. That's a very important point. You were mentioning the corruptness of corruption inside the army. But there is also networking with Boko Haram. Many of the officers, also the high officers, are very much interconnected with Boko Haram, and they also sell weapons to Boko Haram, part of this corruption system. They have also very close connections to the administration and the governors. One of the governors, which was in power in 2003, had Boko Haram as a vigilant force and employed Mohammed Yusuf, the leader of Boko Haram at that time. He was a minister for religious affairs. So they are very much integrated, interconnected inside the society, in the milieu, in the mosques, in the administration, to the policy, and so on and so forth. So this is why it's very complicated to fight Boko Haram on a military basis. You need much more, and so it's very important what you said, poverty in the Northeast. Boko Haram is in somehow, when I say education is sin, there is no education in the north, no schools. 90% in parts of the Northeast, the students don't go to school. So on average 70%, but that's also very high. But in Northeast, it's even higher. So we have a disastrous situation in the North, neglecting the development of the North. You are a development expert, and the government in Abuja has done nothing for the development of the North.
I want to move on to a different but related point. We're talking about the North-South divide. We're talking about poverty in Nigeria. We're talking about the threat posed by Boko Haram. Nevertheless, I have been reading comments, positive spins on this election. This kind of thing, Nigeria's 5th election since the country's return to democracy in 1999. And the question that I have had as I've been reading into this is Nigeria really at this point in time a democracy?
Well, it depends on how you define it. As far as I'm concerned, it is not. It's not a democracy. Because, I mean, what is, democracy, the essence of democracy is that the wish of the people, the wish of the majority prevails, at least at elections. And this is not the system in Nigeria. You see, and that's why, it's good that you're mentioning this point, because that is one of the things that the new INEC, International National Electoral Commission Chairman, Professor Atahiru Jega, that's one of the things that he introduced, to make the election a little bit more democratic. Up till now, what you do in Nigeria, I mean, the major system of running election in Nigeria is rigging. And there are several ways of rigging elections. One of the easiest ways of rigging elections is that, political parties and candidates will buy voters' cards from registered voters. Then on the voting day, and they will give these cards to their hired agents to go and vote, so that you might have one person voting 5 times, because his political boss gives him 5 cards and things like that. So what the new INEC chairman has done is to introduce what he called, electronically based permanent voters cards. And the way he's planned it, is like they'll start on Saturday, for example, on the election day, from 8 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon will be a verification of electoral data, that is accreditation of voters, I think that's what they call it. So voters will be accredited, and it will be registered that this number of voters are here now, So when they close the accreditation at 1 o'clock, then they start voting.
Is this process going to work? Is it going to mean that there will be less vote rigging?
Yeah, it's going to mean
You're
that.
confident?
Yeah, I'm confident about that because the system is that after accrediting voters, the electoral person, electoral officer will sign. All the representatives of political parties are there. They will countersign. Even civil society members are there to sign all those papers. So after that, so we know, for example, we know there are 350 people now voting. So then we go over from 1 o'clock and start voting. Once we record 350 first vote, it means something is wrong. So that the issue of, the number of voters sometime out, spinning the number of registered voters will not occur anymore. So at least there's a little control. It's going to control that. Another thing they're talking about is that
that's a note of optimism. I can sense that Bettina is trying to get in on this question about.
She can get in, but just let me just finish. He's already telling the people also that defending democracy does not stop with voting and going. So the idea is that after voting, you have to be there because the plan is also that immediately after voting, the votes will be counted and declared publicly. So the electoral chairman is also telling the people, don't go to your houses, stay there, until the votes are counted so that you know whether the declared votes reflect what you did and things like that. So a lot of the government is fighting that. Government is arguing that if people are there and votes are counted, they might lead to violence. But, others are saying that it's been tried before and it didn't lead to any violence. So what I'm saying is that there are innovations here and there, and we have to give this innovation a chance. I'm of the opinion that, it might be a beginning of good things to come.
I think it's a view that is shared by many
real democracy
is in Nigeria. Bettina, you've been trying to get in. Yeah.
Well, I think technicalities, of course, are playing a major role, and I think that even if all goes very, very well, still there will be talk about rigging the elections by the party who lost. Having said this, I think you posed a broader question, asking whether Nigeria is a democracy, and I wouldn't be so totally pessimistic on this aspect. Yes, it's a corrupt. Many institutions are corrupt. Government is corrupt. Many people. We talked about the North being marginalized. We have not yet spoken about the people in the Delta where the oil is being produced, but who are really have had their share of suffering, and they are being exploited in a horrible way. Yes, there's a lot to be said. But on the other hand, the press in Nigeria is one of the most interesting. Or the media in Nigeria, one of the most interesting all over Africa. And that is important for functioning society. Over the past few years, a lot of measures have been introduced to make it easier to decentralize certain things and to self-govern. Like if I look at Lagos, for instance, which was basically inhabitable 20 years ago. It was so difficult to live there, simply.
So uninhabitable.
Uninhabitable, yeah, sorry.
A place you simply did not want to live, yeah?
And it was so difficult. To make one appointment a day, you needed 6 hours to get you from A to B. A lot has improved. A lot also when it comes to power failures, or when it comes to road maintenance, when it comes to... In Lagos, to traffic, yes, okay, agreed. I said already that the North has not been getting their fair share. But I think it's too simple to say, it's not democratic, it's all corrupt. It's not true. There are aspects which are encouraging, and I think the mere fact that Nigeria has not returned to military rule since 1999 is an aspect in its own right.
I would like to add a few things. First of all, we have elections since 1999. That's a huge success story. And we have the 5th election, and might be the military will not come back. We can also talk about this. The system has improved. This new system introduced by the Independent Electoral Commission, also a very important step forward for fair and free and fair elections. Very good step. On the other side, there are some problems with the elections. Only 80% of the voters have their voting cards. So 3 days before the vote starts, the elections start, they don't have their card. I don't know how they can organize this. This will cause a huge problems. The loser of this election will, of course, say these were not fair elections, and this will introduce new problems for Nigeria. But I'm quite, let's say, in this respect, I'm quite optimistic. I'm not optimistic about the Boko Haram problems. I'm not optimistic about the split in the society, and that's a huge problem which cannot be tackled by this government, and perhaps also not by a new government.
Okay, let's talk now about the two main presidential candidates. Yeah, we need to talk about who these two gentlemen are. Before we do that, we've got these impressions.
If I will make it, we can make it. You can make it.
President Goodluck Jonathan's campaign ads present him as a man who gets things done. But there's plenty of unfinished business in Nigeria. 60% of the people live below the poverty line. And Boko Haram continues to terrorize parts of the country. 72-year-old Muhammadu Buhari, Jonathan's main challenger, has the reputation of a hardliner and disciplinarian. He led the country for 2 years in the 1980s, following a military coup.
The issues are the scandalous level of unemployment of millions of our young people, the state of the insecurity, the pervasive official corruption.
And whoever wins will first face the challenge of preventing a repeat of the deadly violence that followed Nigeria's last election.
So, Bettina, if we're going to talk about the two candidates, let's begin with the incumbent first, with Goodluck Jonathan. What do we need to know about him to understand who he is and what he stands for?
Well, we do need to know the way Nigeria is. We do need to know the fact that he's a Christian and that he comes from the south. And he gained power because his predecessor fell ill and died eventually. So when he took power, first it was not through election, but simply because he was the vice president at that point. And, well, the whole balance within Nigeria between religion, ethnicities, economic and political power struggles, I still think it is difficult. I know that he won the last elections, and they were supposed to be, I think, the fairest elections ever in Nigeria. I mean, that's at least the general say. But having said this, I think the only thing the North had so far was at least the president. They had the president always. And I think Goodluck Jonathan would have had a chance to, maybe he could have even had a chance to, well, to unite the country is a bit too strong a word, but to make some progress there, if he, coming from the south, had put more effort in trying to develop the north, trying to fight Boko Haram, to take it seriously, and he continuously gave the impression, particularly after the abduction, the first abduction of the schoolgirls, which was a public outcry, and frankly, pardon my language, he gave the impression he didn't give a damn. And that is something which people hold against him, not only in the north.
Yeah, I mean, he gave the impression he didn't give a damn. I'm using your words. He certainly gave the impression that he wasn't up to the job. That's what commentators say. That's what the opposition says. Is that a view that you share, Professor Kappel?
He didn't do his job, not at all. He neglected the problems, and he focused on economic development in the south, let's say foreign direct investment and so on and so forth. But he...
which is not his policy. I mean.
No, that's... okay. Yeah. So he has, I think he is not very powerful president. And when we talk about him, we should also talk about his party. And there is holds a huge split inside the party. It's not the party is not working. And Obasanjo, the former president, also said in an interview, "I support Buhari," and closed his relationship with the PDP. So the PDP is not working, and Goodluck Goodluck Jonathan is, in my view, a very weak president. On the other side, Buhari was a military dictator once in the 1980s, and perhaps he is the more severe candidate. He's more outspoken. He's has a certain charisma, which is not I cannot see with the incumbent. So he has some qualifications. But the people see see both candidates as no-go. In my view, they vote against.
What do you make of General Buhari? What is he a credible alternative to Goodluck Jonathan?
He's a very, very credible alternative. Yeah. Because he has integrity. Because he is totally against corruption.
What about his democratic credentials? He is when he was in power in the past, he threw journalists, he threw opposition figures into prison.
Definitely his democratic credentials are not very high. But the issue is, the question is, what do we need now? You see, the immediate past experience has led to a situation whereby the office of the presidency of Nigeria has lost a lot of charm, a lot of respect. You see, we need somebody to bring back respect to that office. And I think Buhari is the person to do that. What I want to say about Buhari is this. I'm a born Nigerian. I'm a professional political scientist. And I'm relatively old, I'm experienced. The only government I have experienced that had a direction in Nigeria was the government of Buhari. You see, you can say he is high-handed. No doubt about that. He was high-handed, no doubt about that. And one thing that he did that destroyed him in Nigeria was the law they made that time, placing death sentence on cocaine pushing, and then backdating the law so that one or two people, I think, three people were killed, but I think one of them was not, committed the offense when the old law that says imprisonment was still in power, So Buhari backdated that law, the new law that says now is death sentence in order to get this guy and kill him. That was one thing that destroyed him in Nigeria. But I can tell you two things. One is that the political world of 1983, 84, 85 is different from the political world of today. What he did in those days, he will not be able to do now. Okay, secondly, listening to him recently, let me just finish. Listening to him recently, I can tell you that I don't know him personally. I just, these are things I take from, watching television and, reading things. And I can tell you he is quite a changed person. Yes, he knows that these things cannot happen these days. He regrets it too.
He says of himself that he has discovered democracy. Yeah? Is that for you, Bettina? No, you've said your piece. Bettina, is that credible for you that he has discovered democracy, given his track record and his past credentials?
Well, I'm not very optimistic on this, and I think Nigerians are between a rock and a hard place. I wouldn't like to vote for either of the two candidates for a variety of reasons. Also, again, we have been tackling the issue, what is democracy? So I really would like to know what exactly Mr. Buhari understands by he discovered democracy. If he means, not to mean to be sarcastic, but if he means he really likes a system where he can get into office by peaceful means, then I do believe he discovered democracy. But democracy entails some more things than that.
At least he is not corrupt.
No, that I agree.
He is not part of the system.
He's not part of the corruption system, but this has got nothing to do with being democratic. Okay. I give him credit for his personal integrity.
This is an extremely important point. If he is not corrupt, if he is an anti-establishment figure, and that is the way he's presenting himself, do members of the current elite have to fear that they might end up behind bars?
Thank you very much. Let me come in here, please. I want to start by saying that, the major question for me is what do Nigerians need the most? Is it promoting economic development through fighting corruption because you've got to do that? Or is it democracy? I can tell you that the average person on the street is more concerned with functioning infrastructure, peace and security, and functioning economy than this so-called democracy. Secondly, your understanding of democracy in the West might not be the way the Nigerians understand it. I'm not, holding brief for anybody, So let me just.
I want to dwell on that point about the battle against corruption on the one hand, tough measures there, democracy on the other hand, and you're talking about ordinary Nigerians. Let's listen to somebody who's not quite an ordinary Nigerian, the Nobel Prize-winning writer Wole Soyinka. Let's hear what he had to say about developments in Nigeria. I'd like to bring him in. This is in an interview with Deutsche Welle's Jan Philipp Scholz.
We have proof, for instance, of things like attempted movement towards, shall we say, an interim government. This has been started denied in many quarters, but believe me, those moves exist. And there have been meetings, and names have been named. I've taken the trouble to check on these details. I'm speaking publicly about them for the first time only because I am absolutely satisfied and I have the details of such moves by some ex-military officers, some security officers who even are trying to push aside the political contestants and use the unrest as an excuse to hold an interim, to establish an interim government. What they intend, how they intend to rule in that interim period, I do not know. But definitely, the moves have already been indicated. Now, that is a dangerous situation.
Robert Kappel, what do you make of that? I mean, effectively, he's saying that there's going to be some kind of a military coup.
Of course, there is a danger, but only under certain circumstances. But I would add something. I think the ordinary Nigerian has a huge interest in improving his life, education, jobs, and so on and so forth, tackling high youth unemployment and getting jobs. That's the most important. But on the other side, they are very much interested in democracy, participation in the whole process. And I would not underestimate this. The Nigerian is a democrat, more or less. And we have a huge middle class, and they are very much interested in democracy. So what Wole Soyinka said is, of course, a danger. I agree with him, but only if the Nigerian government cannot tackle the problem of Boko Haram, has no ideas how to develop the north, integrate Boko Haram fighters again into the society, negotiate with Boko Haram. Nobody talks about negotiations. That's very important. That's one problem. The other problem is in the Niger Delta. You have also movements in the Niger Delta, and it might come up also. So also a danger. But if we have the situation of a failed state, the government is not able to tackle all these problems.
So do you say Nigeria is a failed state?
It's not. It can be a failed state if the Boko Haram problem cannot be solved.
In that interview that Wole Soyinka gave to Deutsche Welle, he actually said that he believes Nigeria is moving closer and closer, and is very close indeed to becoming a failed state these days.
A gross exaggeration.
Yeah,
it's an exaggeration.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's somehow Nigeria is very stable. It's now we have a huge process of discussion and many tensions inside this society due to the elections. But after the election, okay, the winner and the losers will sit together in the parliament and they talk about the new government and so on and so forth. And there we will have a certain stabilization of the problems. But Boko Haram is, of course, a very major factor.
And besides, the economy is not in a very good shape either. Yeah, even left alone the corruption, which is a major threat as well. But the fact that the oil revenues declined and that I mean, I think it made up to 35% of the GDP and 70%, 80% of government spending. And the situation is not going to improve. I mean, basically, they have nothing else but the oil, and their revenues are shrinking.
And nobody's talking about that. They're not thinking about that.
Okay.
They just want to win elections.
One last question, because we're slowly running out of time, and I'd like to give each of you a take on this. This election is clearly very important for Nigeria, for the future of Nigerian democracy. How important is this election for Africa in general? John?
Well, the election is important for Africa generally because Nigeria, by its sheer size, geographically, population-wise, and economy-wise, is supposed to be leading Africa. So if Nigeria is not, and Nigeria is not in a position to do that now because of all those problems we're talking about. So that is a loss to Africa as a unit, And so getting it right for Nigeria, will also improve getting it right in the whole of Africa. I mean, just to chip in one thing, I think there was a preacher sometime in the 80s who was saying that if you look at Africa, Africa, you could take Africa as a pistol, whereby the nozzle is north and the trigger is Nigeria. You hold it on South Africa, you trigger Nigeria, it goes out through the north. So you're just trying to show the important countries in Africa.
Bettina?
I think it's overreaching to say it's important for the whole of Africa. Okay, agreed upon the fact that it's a major economic power, but still. But it's definitely extremely important for the region. I mean, it will have a large impact. If this goes wrong, it will have a large impact on Chad, on Cameroon, on Niger.
West Africa.
The whole of West Africa. So it is crucial.
Let's have free and fair elections, then we can avoid brinkmanship in this country. And if the new government tackles the problem of poverty, of terrorism, Islamistic movements in the north, it's not only Boko Haram, then we might have rising Nigeria, and that will also have will also sorry, come on.
Point. Yeah, just
one final word, one sentence.
Yeah, one sentence. I just want to say that it is correct that the economic neglect of the North is at the background of this problem, but it's also correct to say that this has been there for the past 40, 50 years since independence. The neglect did not start with Jonathan. I'm not holding brief for him.
Point taken. Thank you very much for joining us on this latest edition of Quadriga, coming to you from Berlin. A fascinating debate. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought. Bye-bye for now, and tschüss.